Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 26th of September. Today we're doing a frontline update and we're going to be looking at the Orikhiv sector. So to begin with, we're going to look at Novoprokopivka, and what I will say is that there are no changes to the map since my last update, but I did issue a correction to the map based off of a video that was released by Ukraine's Korn group, which is also referred to as the Immaterium Reconnaissance Drone Group of Ukraine's 116th Mechanized Brigade, which is one of these units that was created for the counteroffensive. Now, in the video, you could see that the FPV crews, they target 3 Russian dugouts that are located to the east and to the northeast of the village of Novoprokopivka. And as a result, I was forced to change the map because previously I had the Ukrainians marked in these areas over here with the blue line looking like this, but this is simply incorrect because the Russians were located in these dugouts. So in all likelihood, this area in between the northeastern fields and Novoprokopivka is a gray zone with some Russian holdouts still located over there, which is a part of why the Ukrainians are unable to launch a two-pronged attack from the northeast and from the north. We've already seen them launching reconnaissance attacks with small or really small squads, like in that video with 2 Ukrainian troops. But we've not seen them do that from the northeast yet, and that's due to the Russian presence in that area, which is now confirmed by this Ukrainian video. So here you can see the video, and what I would note is that the sophistication of these drone crews is improving as both sides begin to improvise. And you could see that, first of all, these drones are able to very accurately target dugouts that are pretty small in radius when you see the bigger picture from an aerial view. And remember, they're going at these dugouts, they're descending at a very fast speed, and they're still able to maneuver in a way in which they're able to hit maybe not every single dugout entirely accurately, but still in the general area, which could either cause casualties or just causes the Russian forces in the area to withdraw. And it also goes both ways. The Russian Beaver unit and the Sudoplatov battalion, they are doing very similar things against the Ukrainian side. And remember, they're doing this in spite of the fact that there's electronic warfare jamming systems that are making it very difficult for drones to operate near the line of contact. Now, in the fields to the east of Robotyne and Novoprokopivka, there are not many changes, and this is the area I'm referring to. But I do want to highlight something very, very important that's happening just to the south of these fields. So new satellite imagery that's been coming out over the past few days from this area that's in between the first and second Surovikin lines, as they're commonly referred to colloquially. It shows that there is a high concentration of new scorch marks, especially in a 6-kilometer strip of land that is like starting over here and ending over here, basically in this area over here, in between the first Surovikin line and the town of Ochirutavate. Now here's the same map I was just showing, but overlaid with the satellite imagery, and you could see that this white box is the area where you have all of the scorch marks. I'll show them also zoomed in over here in this post that I'll obviously link in the description for credit. You could see all of the scorch marks over here in some of the different hedgerows, in different roads that are in between the 2 defense lines. Here's the elevation map, and this is very, very useful to give us an idea of what's going on and why the Russians are holding on to their positions on the first line of defense. The reason why the Russians are holding on to their positions and not withdrawing to other defensive positions, because something that I've been asked about a lot is why doesn't Russia withdraw back to their other lines? Because they do have defense in depth, and a lot of people have been wondering why they're continuing to launch localized counterattacks, where are they continuing to defend so heavily on the line of contact, in the security zone, and on the first line of defense? Well, the reason is shown by this elevation map, at least specifically on the Robotyne sector. What you'll see over here is that this is the line of contact, and it's also generally where you have the defense lines. You can see that they're located generally on a pretty high elevation, and there's 2 main hills that the Ukrainians are looking to take over. There's the hill over here, which is just to the south of the fields that I was mentioning that are to the east of Novoprokopivka. And then there's the hills that are to the south of Verbove. And there's also another hill to the north of Verbove that I will talk about later in the video, but this is generally a high ground to the south of Verbove that I'm marking with the larger rectangle. Now, Russia currently holds these positions, But if you look further to the south, in Russian-controlled territory that's a couple of kilometers to the south of the first defense line, but is still to the north of Russia's second defense line, you do have valleys that are located on pretty low elevation when compared to the rest of the geography in the area. So the Russian fear would be that if they were to withdraw to a second line of defense, the Ukrainians would have control over the high ground in the areas that have marked in red with the rectangles and with the lines, and they will be able to fire upon Russian positions that are located on lower elevation. And that's why Russia's holding on to the higher elevation areas. You can see that a lot of Ukraine's shelling is actually ongoing in the lower elevated areas in between Russia's two lines of defense. And what this means is that the Russians have a harder time sending reinforcements into this area. It's harder for Russian logistics in this area. And something to mention is that Russia actually has an intermediary line of defense in between the first and second Surovikin lines, as they're commonly referred to. In blue, you could see this intermediary line. And this is the exact same area that Ukraine is hitting so hard with those scorch marks that you could see a lot of the artillery being fired towards. And this is because the Ukrainians do not want the Russians to use this as a fallback line that could be used to prevent Ukrainian attacks further south in the direction of Oteretuvate. And that is an extremely important village, which is just, first of all, extremely fortified, but it's also a local supply hub. A lot of the roads connect in this area and then branch out to other parts of the front line. And by shelling the area to the north of it with the intermediary line, it's harder for Russia to move in additional resources over there and for them to set up their own artillery in that area. Additionally, the satellite imagery from 2 days ago shows that there are a lot of scorch marks in the area just to the west of Verbove. So Verbove is the village over here in blue, and then the dragon's teeth are highlighted in yellow by the original poster. You can see here that the scorch marks are located in the area that is actually to the east of Russia's manned trench, which they constructed. But based off of this and other footage and other reports more generally, it seems likely that Russia does not have any presence in this manned trench anymore that I have marked with those red lines. In all likelihood, the Ukrainians have control over parts of it in the north, in the northwest. And again, this is not a very firm control. It's not like a solid line that the Ukrainians have control over. It just means that they have squads that are being sent into this area on a regular basis. And then the southern part of this manned trench around here, where I'll mark in yellow, is most likely a gray zone. But either way, what you see is that there are a lot of scorch marks just to the west of Verbove, which means that now you have Ukrainian artillery in this area, and the fighting has shifted very, very close to the village itself, which also means that the Russians have moved their defensive units, all of their defenses, back into the village itself. With the Ukrainians able to solidify not full control, but having more activity in the areas to the northwest of Verbove, now they're feeling more emboldened to utilize their vehicles, which they had in reserve that they were not using. Now they're beginning to move in a lot of their BMPs and mortars, for instance, and now you see the results of that. It's able to dismount infantry closer to the front line, which does allow for troops to conduct even more attacks with larger numbers on Russian positions, but it also leads invariably to strikes by the Russian side on that equipment. So here you could see what I believe is a Kornet 8GM hitting the mortar, and the crew survives. You could see at the end of the crew, they get out of the vehicle and they run and seek refuge within the tree line. And this is pretty deep comparatively into the Ukrainian lines. So they were able to get out of it probably unfazed, because this is a tree line with much more foliage. But either way, this gives you an idea of what's going on whenever the Ukrainians do move in vehicles into this area. In another video, you have elements of Russia's 76th Air Assault Division. And in the video, you could see them. They are hitting what appears to be Ukrainian positions. I can't confirm that there are Ukrainians present in this position, but this is what I'm referring to. You have the Russian forces hitting this specific tree line over here, which does appear to have a lot of foliage, which means that it could be used as a good dugout area, a good forward position for the Ukrainians before they launch further squads into the anti-tank ditch, because the anti-tank ditch is located over here. We have this very good aerial view provided to us by this drone footage. And then here you could see that the dragon's teeth as well, and you could see that there are 3 layers to the dragon's teeth. Another thing to note is that you could see there's an opening in the dragon's teeth where vehicles pass through. That could be made in order to funnel in Ukrainian forces in order to fire upon them, but it also could be because at the time of the construction of these dragon's teeth, all of the surrounding areas were still under Russian control. So the Russians still wanted to move vehicles in and out of the area without having such a massive roadblock. But I'll just continue showing you guys the video. And this just gives you guys an idea of how the Russians are trying to respond to the threat that the Ukrainian small groups pose. And the reason I say small groups is because a lot of people wonder how the Ukrainians could continue to send these squads day after day without running out of men entirely in their new units that are aimed towards launching these sort of assaults. Now, the reason why is because Ukrainians are really relying on a few platoons within some of the assault battalions of these brigades that are on the front line, like the 82nd Air Assault Brigade and 46th Air Assault Brigade. Those are the two units doing it the most on this sector around Verbove. And these platoons, they send out squads to the line of contact, and these squads have such small numbers of men that, yes, they do actually suffer high casualties in some instances once they reach the line of contact, which is understandable because of how dangerous the fighting is in that region, because it is completely open in some cases when those troops are walking through open fields, when they're walking through certain areas that do not have foliage. In those cases, they could be spotted by drones, they could be spotted by artillery, which leads to artillery strikes. But when you zoom out and look at the broader level, those losses don't mean that the entire brigade is rendered combat ineffective, because it's only small squads from those brigades that are being moved in to conduct those attacks. So if a certain squad suffers a heavy amount of casualties and can no longer conduct the operations, then the platoon will just send a different squad in to do the same thing. And that's how they rotate every single day, basically, and are able to conduct these non-stop attacks on the Russian lines without having the entire brigades decimated. And that's also why the 82nd Air Assault Brigade, which is a unit that Ukraine has been using for the past month, or really even more, and they've seen the brunt of the fighting in very, very hot areas of the front line, like Robotyne and now Verbove. That's why this unit has still been able to conduct combat operations even now using their vehicles now, despite the fact that they've been fighting for so long at the front line. Additionally, it now seems like the Ukrainians have moved in their first ever vehicle into the village of Verbove. In the video that I'm about to show, a BMP is leaving Verbove. This is a Ukrainian BMP, and then at the end it gets fired upon by Russian forces. What this shows is that Ukrainians feel a level of comfort operating in the northwestern parts of Verbove, that they're even able to send in a BMP, and perhaps they wanted to dismount a Ukrainian squad that would be able to operate even deeper into the village, or perhaps they were only going on a sort of reconnaissance operation to gauge how the Russians would respond to them moving in a BMP. That's all possible. Either way, this does show us that the northwestern parts of the village are a gray zone, and this is just backed up by the fact that you have a lot of Ukrainian forces operating so close to this area for such a long period of time. It just would make sense that the Ukrainians are near this area and that the Russians have moved back their defensives even deeper into the village itself. And the Ukrainians in this area, the way that they're entering the village of Verbove is twofold. One way is through this specific route over here. I'll mark it in blue. There is a, I believe, tank ditch, an anti-tank ditch over here in Dragon's Teeth that's going in this direction. And just adjacent to it, there's a road that is located that is now blocked off by the defenses. So that road is probably something that Russia intentionally kept open in order for their vehicles to move in and out. But now the Ukrainians are using this opening and they're using this road to send in their own vehicles through this area and also to send in their own infantry. Then you also have the specific tree line over here, but this tree line has lost a lot of foliage and can no longer be used for concealment as much as it was before. Nonetheless, you still have Ukrainian soldiers that are going through this area, and then they're breaking past the defense line over here and then entering the village of Verbove like that. And then if you go a bit to the south, you have the Ukrainian forces that were able to solidify some activity around the manned trench over here, and then they just make their way to the east and enter Verbove like this through this trench over here, and then go up to the north. And that's how you have three different routes for Ukrainian activity in this region. And lastly, there are reports from pro-Russian Telegram channels that there has been a lot of fighting reported in a unspecified height called height 136.7. And most likely this piece of high ground is located to the north of Verbove. To back this up, there's also new heat anomalies that were detected in the area on the northern flank of Verbove, so that would be over here. This place is extremely important, And I've been stressing that for a while now, but I haven't really seen a lot of fighting from this region, which is very interesting to me. And a lot of that may be because of the fact that Ukraine is focusing southwards. But either way, this area has extremely high elevation in comparison to the village of Verbove itself. Verbove is located in a valley, and it's surrounded by two heights, one height to the north, as we just talked about, and one height to the south. And this creates a very interesting topographical situation where Russia does still control the heights to the south and to the north, but the Ukrainians are approaching it to the south. And now we're also hearing reports that the Ukrainians may be trying to attack the Russian heights to the north. I don't know if it will amount to anything, but it would be extremely important for the Ukrainians to get control of this high ground if they want to fire upon the Russian forces within Verbove and create a sort of kill zone where they're firing from the high ground onto the Ukrainian positions, or sorry, onto the Russian positions within the valley in the village itself. And so that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.